I see that people are saying hello in the chat. Can everybody see? Hi, everyone. Okay, great. Okay. Well, so very good. Okay, so I think that we will begin. There's interpretation. Yes, now the interpretation button has been turned on. So those who want to listen into French or English, you can choose your language as a participant, and then afterwards you will remain in that language. You can't really switch back and forth. Donc, pour ceux et celles qui veulent écouter l'interprétation, il y a l'interprétation anglais et français, mais vous devez choisir. Il y a une petite icône ronde là qui dit interprétation. Vous devez choisir anglais ou français, et après ça, vous aurez cette langue pour toute la conférence avec l'interprétation. Alors, merci beaucoup d'être venu, tout le monde. Et puis, on va commencer. Moi, je suis Marie Botti de Femmes de diverses origines. Et puis, d'abord, on va commencer avec notre reconnaissance territoriale. C'est Dolores Chu qui va nous lire, qui va nous faire cette reconnaissance territoriale. Merci, Dolores, vas-y.
Okay. Okay, so I'll do this in English, and so it would be interpreted in French. We would like to begin by acknowledging that we are on unceded indigenous lands. Ghanaian Gahaka Nation is recognized as the custodians of the lands and waters on which we gather today. Jojaga, Montreal, is historically known as a gathering place for many First Nations. Today, it is home to a diverse population of Indigenous and other peoples. We support the ongoing struggles of Indigenous people, the original inhabitants of Turtle Island, who, as a consequence of settler colonialism, suffer dispossession of land, destruction of culture and way of life, including more egalitarian gender relations. Today, the systemic and structural inequality and racism of settler colonialism in Canada is made very visible by the fault lines that the COVID-19 crisis has thrown up.
Merci, merci Dolores. Maintenant, j'aimerais continuer. Alors, la crise du COVID-19 met en évidence les inégalités systémiques causées par le capitalisme, l'impérialisme, le colonialisme, le racisme et le patriarcat. Alors, je parle en français, donc ça devrait être interprété vers l'anglais, d'accord? Alors, celles parmi nous qui sommes les faibles salariés, les sans statut, travaillons souvent en première ligne pour fournir des services, de la nourriture et des soins au reste de la population. Nous travaillons dans les entrepôts, dans les camions de livraison, des services d'entretien et de soins personnels, souvent sans équipement de protection adéquate, au risque de notre vie. En même temps, nous sommes souvent victimes d'attaques physiques et verbales dues au racisme et à la désignation de bouc émissaire. D'autres parmi nous qui sommes licenciés ou incapables de travailler n'ont pas ou peu accès à l'aide gouvernementale, ou on risque l'expulsion ou la prison si nous demandons de l'aide. Avec l'augmentation des cas de violence domestique, celles d'entre nous qui sommes en situation précaire ont encore moins de ressources vers lesquelles se tourner pour obtenir de l'aide. Puis nous entendrons une de nos camarades nous parler de ça justement. Aujourd'hui, les travailleuses de première ligne sont appelées les anges gardiennes. Alors, on entend ça à tout bout de champ avec notre premier ministre Legault. Elles sont considérées comme des héros. Mais on sait trop bien qu'une fois tout cela passé, nous savons que les soignantes, les femmes, les prestataires de services de première ligne, les personnes qui gagnent le salaire minimum, les personnes vivant de l'aide sociale seront oubliées de nouveau. Dans cette première d'une série de webinaires organisés par Femmes de diverses origines, nous entendrons des représentantes d'organisations de notre réseau nous parler des réalités de nos communautés de lutte pendant la crise de COVID-19. Les prochains webinaires porteront sur des informations provenant de plusieurs de nos pays d'origine, où on entendra des alternatives et des leçons à tirer de la crise ici et dans le monde entier. Alors, bienvenue. Les objectifs de cet webinaire, c'est vraiment d'entendre les intervenantes des groupes communautaires de la base sur comment leur travail a changé depuis cette crise de COVID-19. Quels sont les défis auxquels elles font face? Quels sont les obstacles dans le travail d'organisation? Quelles actions voulez-vous? Et puis, de qui voulez-vous ces actions-là? Et ensuite, des recommandations si vous en avez. Alors, merci encore d'être venu, tout le monde. Et puis, nous allons commencer. J'espère que tout le monde a... vous pouvez aussi poser vos questions dans le bouton chat ou bien aussi avec le bouton questions-réponses. Pardon, seulement en utilisant le bouton questions-réponses pour poser vos questions. D'accord? Alors, on va commencer avec Carole. Carole est une organisatrice de l'ATAP, Association des travailleuses temporaires et d'agences de placement. C'est une branche du Centre des travailleuses et travailleurs immigrantes et qui concentre ses efforts sur l'organisation des personnes employées via les agences de placement. Alors, Carole va nous parler avec son téléphone. J'espère que nous aurons... Oui, alors on la voit ici. Alors, merci beaucoup. Carole, vas-y. Merci.
Bonjour à tous. J'espère que vous me suivez bien. Allô?
Oui, on t'entend bien, Carole. Vas-y.
OK. Je m'appelle Zé Bénédicte Carole. Je suis membre active du CTI, qui est un centre pour des travailleurs immigrants dédié à la défense des droits du travail, que j'ai rencontré par le biais de mon avocat qui voulait une lettre d'appui du CTI pour régulariser mon statut avec le programme PEC dont j'avais droit après 1 an de travail ici, mais que j'avais malheureusement perdu à cause de mon employeur vicieux qui m'a séquestré, harcelé sexuellement et fait travailler comme une esclave pendant 2 ans. Et un consultant en immigration qui m'a induit en erreur. Et par le CTI, en travaillant avec eux, je suis devenue une porte-parole de la TAP, qui est l'Association des travailleurs et travailleuses d'agences de placement, fondée en 2011, car j'ai travaillé aussi dans des agences de placement depuis que je suis arrivée à Montréal, presque pendant 2 ans. Et j'ai subi les injustices de ce système. Bon, avec la situation du COVID-19, notre communauté a été obligée de réfléchir aux stratégies d'organisation de lutte. La question était que si avant, malgré les efforts du centre et de l'association à fortifier ces personnes en situation précaire et surtout ces personnes sans statut, sans papier, qui vivaient déjà dans la peur et la dépression, en fournissant plus d'efforts dans les travaux les plus pénibles, avec des salaires les plus bas, pour pouvoir gérer honnêtement le quotidien et participer malgré tout à l'évolution de l'économie du Canada. Parce qu'elle paye tout achat au Canada, inclut les taxes, elle paye les loyers, elle paye hydro, elle paye les cartes d'autobus. Mais exposée à l'injustice en étant vulnérable, nous nous posons la question, comment ferons-nous actuellement pour être visibles dans l'invisible? Comment adapter notre campagne à nos revendications face à cette crise? Si dans une situation normale, nous n'étions pas entendus et vivions dans l'espoir de se faire remarquer positivement par ce combat juste et humain, comment allons-nous faire maintenant? Nous, comme la plupart des Québécois, avons tous perdu nos emplois, à la seule différence que la plupart de nous n'ont aucune protection économique parce qu'elles n'ont pas de statut. Alors, nous avons dû commencer par s'assurer qu'il y a un peu de réserve, puis nous avons contacté des banques et des chaînes alimentaires. Il y avait des personnes compatissantes qui apportaient notre nourriture à nos portes et aussi des cadres de supermarchés pour que nous puissions nous ravitailler sur les besoins élémentaires au sein de notre communauté. Il y a eu une autre petite communauté qui s'occupait de la nourriture. Pour nous remonter les unes avec les autres afin de ne pas tomber totalement dans la dépression et au stress, nous avons commencé à nous parler au téléphone pour s'assurer que tous nous allons bien. Il y a des femmes qui s'occupent de nous organiser des rencontres téléphoniques, des casses des supermarchés, des banques alimentaires de première nécessité et aussi nous sommes également à la recherche des financements pour nous. Malheureusement, les défis sont nombreux. Nous avons commencé à chercher des plateformes sécurisées qui n'étaient pas Zoom, afin de pouvoir revenir aux réunions une fois par semaine. C'était dur et ça a pris du temps, mais nous sommes arrivés à trouver la plateforme. Dans ce contexte, les réunions sont très longues, voire 3 à 4 heures, car les besoins sont nombreux. Chaque membre, chaque femme a à agir et il faut rassurer tout le monde dans la situation malgré la situation qui nous semble à notre désavantage. Aussi, tous nos individuels au niveau de l'immigration et des normes du travail ou au niveau criminel sont tous arrêtés. Et cela a créé beaucoup d'anxiété. Mais aussi, en temps nous avons pu réfléchir sur des nouvelles stratégies. Le confinement est un obstacle pour nous car notre campagne contre l'harcèlement sexuel s'est arrêtée. Cette année, l'idée était d'aller dans les stations de métro, dans les usines, dans les fermes, dans les champs, afin d'être plus en contact avec d'autres femmes et les inviter à faire partie de notre groupe pour avoir plus de force dans nos revendications auprès du gouvernement provincial et fédéral. Dans cette réimplantation que nous avons dû faire, nous avons décidé de nous rendre visibles malgré la peur, le danger et participer à des conférences de presse et à des panels comme celui-ci. Nous travaillons fortement avec de nombreuses organisations pro-migrants à travers le Canada. Nous nous sommes organisés pour eux pour demander l'accès aux programmes que le gouvernement fédéral a mis en place tels que le programme de prestation du genre pour toute personne sans statut. Pour notre communauté, c'est fondamental, car comme je l'ai dit, la plupart d'entre nous n'ont aucune protection économique, mais doivent continuer à payer leur loyer, leurs factures. Le plus important de tout, c'est la régularisation de tous les membres sans statut, car beaucoup ont perdu leur emploi, d'autres travaillent dans des services dits essentiels pour le Canada, dans des conditions à risque et vulnérables, plus qu'avant, encourant le risque d'être malade ou de mourir. Au niveau provincial, le Québec a accepté de tester COVID-19 au sans statut, mais ce n'est pas suffisant. Nous voulons que le Québec donne l'accès complet aux soins de santé au-delà de COVID-19. Déjà que beaucoup d'entre nous sont stressés et seront malades pas à cause de COVID-19, mais à cause de la dépression, du stress et peut-être des conditions de travail difficiles. Ça me revient à vous parler d'une sœur sans statut qui, depuis des années, travaille à un salaire vraiment misérable ici au Canada, mais malgré tout, a eu la force de continuer à vivre ici, à payer ses factures honnêtement. mais actuellement, elle est dans un état de santé très grave et a été hospitalisée 5 fois. Et en moins de 15 jours, a subi 2 opérations et passé les derniers jours en soins intensifs. Hier, elle a quitté l'hôpital et aura besoin d'une 3e opération. Le traitement qu'il lui faut coûte $1000 par mois environ. Comment va-t-elle payer? Comment va-t-elle continuer à payer son loyer si elle ne peut pas travailler? Elle n'a pas droit à aucune prestation, à aucune protection. Qui va s'en occuper? Le Québec est un pays d'accueil qui parle d'égalité des hommes et de respect de choix. Et nous demandons au Québec de donner l'aide sociale à toutes ces personnes sans statut d'immigration, accès complet à la santé, et doit accorder un certificat d'admissibilité de la province de Québec à toutes les personnes sans statut afin qu'elles puissent demander leur résidence. Donc, c'est ce que nous souhaitons vraiment, leur résidence au niveau fédéral. Merci. Allô?
Allô, merci beaucoup, Carole. C'était très éclairant, là. C'est une réalité qu'on n'entend pas souvent. Je pense que c'est quelque chose que pour la plupart des gens, et ce sont des choses auxquelles on ne pense pas sans être dans cette situation. Merci beaucoup pour ce partage. Écoute, maintenant, on va passer à la prochaine conférencière. Pour ceux qui se sont joints à nous depuis le début, là, c'est juste pour vous dire que vous avez le choix d'écouter la conférence en anglais ou en français. Il y a un petit bouton en bas de votre bandeau qui dit interprétation et vous pèsez sur la petite flèche et vous pouvez choisir l'anglais ou le français. Alors, mais celle que vous choisissez, c'est celle que vous devez garder pour le reste de la conférence. So just saying that there's a little button for those who have joined us since the beginning. There's a little button for interpretation, and you can choose to listen to the conference in either English or French. And but once you choose, you have to stay with that language. Okay. Bon, alors maintenant, nous allons entendre Amy Darwish. Amy travaille avec CAP, le Comité d'action de Parc Extension. CAP soutient les locataires dans leur lutte pour un logement décent et abordable. Par l'éducation populaire, le travail de soutien et l'action collective, ils organisent pour de meilleures conditions de logement, pour la construction de logements sociaux et contre la gentrification de Parc Extension. Merci beaucoup, Amy, d'être avec nous. Alors, vas-y, on aimerait bien t'entendre. Please unmute your mic, yeah.
Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, so good morning, everyone. As Marie mentioned, I'm speaking on behalf
Amy, sorry, your mic is muted somehow again. Yeah.
Okay, is that better?
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that.
Okay.
Cool. So like many crises, pandemics tend to hit working class.
Oops, sorry, Amy, it seems to be muted again. Hang on. Hang on, I'm just going to check with the technical support here to see whether it should be you or we that are muting the mic. Just a minute. Yeah, Amy, I don't know why, but your mic is there. Yeah. So can you just keep an eye on it? Sorry, but I don't know why it keeps muting. But
no problem. I'll just keep my the bottom part of the screen open and just periodically.
Okay. Okay, good. Thank you.
No problem. So I guess as I was saying, it's important to remember that Park X was already in the middle of a housing crisis before this pandemic began. Over the last 2 years, we've really been seeing gentrification ramping up in the neighborhood. For a lot of Park X tenants, that's meant skyrocketing rents and a wave of evictions. It's meant condos and luxury apartments springing up on sites that were once earmarked for social housing. It's meant discrimination from landlords who only want to rent to students and professionals. It's also meant more racial profiling and a heavier police presence on the street. It's meant more pressure to accept overcrowded apartments and terrible living conditions. Many of the prevailing public health directives call on tenants to stay home, to stock up on essentials, and practice social distancing. But what does that mean when you're sharing a 5.5 apartment with 3 other families? How accessible is confinement when your landlord refuses to fix water leaks, deal with mold, or exterminate cockroaches, bed bugs, or mice? How do you limit trips outside your home when your appliances are broken and you can't store food? So the housing crisis in Park X might not have started with COVID-19, but it's definitely exacerbated it. As restaurants and small businesses in the neighborhood closed down, many lost their jobs. Prior to the crisis, a lot of tenants were already living paycheck to paycheck. Around 40% of the neighborhood paid about 30% of their rent, income in rent, which left them with very little cushion to weather these kinds of crises. While the applications for the Canadian Emergency Response Benefit opened last week, the benefits didn't arrive in time for April 1st, and also many tenants in the neighborhood aren't able to access it, especially the case for undocumented workers. As such, many tenants were unable to pay rent on April 1st, or were forced to choose between securing their housing or foregoing food and medication. In a context where many landlords are already looking for a reason to push out long-term tenants, appealing to a landlord's sense of compassion or trying to reach agreements is not an option for many in the neighborhood. So a lot of this has been folding actually at a time when, so given also the economic uncertainty and the current public health directives, a lot of tenants are also choosing not to move this year, which we're worried is going to further exacerbate the housing shortage. Vacancy rates were already at their lowest in about 15 years. They were hovering around 1% in Park X and near 0 for bigger apartments. Even though there's an eviction moratorium in place now and rental board hearings are suspended, they could resume very soon after the public health state of emergency is lifted. Many tenants whose repossession or eviction hearings were postponed could find themselves having to find an apartment with little time and in a hostile rental market. We're really worried that many tenants could actually find themselves homeless as of July 1st. So in a lot of ways, this has been unfolding as our capacity to reach tenants has been limited. As the community center that houses our office closed down, much of our work now takes place by phone or by emails. However, a lot of our members don't have internet access, don't necessarily follow social media, and often write in languages other than English and French. As such, the current context has really forced us to try to adapt the way that we work. In some cases, this has looked like multiple rounds of phone calls to members, especially around the first of the month to check in, to get a sense of what's happening on the ground and to follow up with people if they're in precarious situations. In other cases, it's looked like dropping off formal notices and rent increase refusal letters in people's mailboxes. Over the past 2 weeks, I've set up a sort of satellite Cape office on the benches of Park Athena with latex gloves, a Wi-Fi hotspot, and my coworker Sonia on the other line to translate and relay information to tenants. We're also planning to circulate a couple posters in several neighborhood languages at grocery stores, dépanneurs, laundromats, and in the streets to make tenant information more available in the lead up to May 1st. At the same time, we know that we can't just manage the consequences of this crisis or just to deal with it as on a case-by-case basis as negotiations between tenants and their landlords. We've been trying to find ways to create space for tenants to connect, to build solidarity with one another, and to organize collectively at a time where we're supposed to remain apart. So how do we reach tenants when we can't hand out flyers, knock on doors, and meet in hallways and lobbies? How do we keep visible, keep momentum going towards our broader demands, and bring tenants together in ways that don't put people at risk? We don't have easy answers for any of these questions. Some ideas we've had include organizing online rallies, call-in campaigns, banner drops, and other creative actions. We've also been inspired by groups, by the work of groups like the Los Angeles Tenant Union, who organized anti-eviction car caravans to demand that rent be canceled and that no tenant be evicted, even after this crisis subsides. We've also been calling for a number of measures to make sure that tenants aren't left behind in the wake of the COVID-19 crisis. First and foremost, we're calling for rent to be canceled, both in April and in May, in solidarity with the many tenants who won't be able to pay rent on May 1st or who are going to have to choose between food and between paying rent or buying groceries. We're also calling for a moratorium on evictions for any instance of non-payment of rent during the pandemic, and also for the moratorium on evictions to be prolonged past the public health emergency. Since many visits are postponed and it's difficult for tenants to find apartments right now, we're also asking that July 1st be postponed and that leases be extended throughout the summer for tenants who chose not to renew their lease or who are facing repossession or eviction hearings in the months to come. We also think that Airbnb, hotel, and vacant condo or luxury apartment units should be open to those who need them, especially folks who are homeless, living in unsafe conditions, or hoping to leave abusive relationships. Finally, in predominantly migrant neighborhoods like Park X, we believe that we need to see our work as part of a broader migrant justice struggle. The neglect, disinvestment, and disregard for Park X tenants is, we feel, a form of systemic racism. It's about who's desirable, who is disposable, and ultimately displaceable. We echo demands made by Solidarity Across Borders, the Immigrant Worker Center, and others for status for all, an end to detention, and an end to deportations. In closing, I just wanted to say that it's been inspiring seeing a number of neighborhood mutual aid initiatives at the forefront of the response to this crisis. For instance, the Park X Mutual Aid Group got a multilingual poster campaign off the ground in under a week. And has been doing grocery deliveries, childcare, and emergency rent fundraisers since then. I believe that it'll be solidarity between neighbors that'll see us through this crisis. Thanks very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Amy. That was great, and I hope that that initiative will be something that will be picked up by other people, other neighborhoods as well. You're providing a great model. Thank you. So now we're going to hear from Ghazala Munawar and Juvaria Yasser, who are part of the South Asian Women's Community Center. It's a service, support, and advocacy organization for South Asian women and their families. It was founded in 1981, and it's one of the real strong institutions in our progressive community. So I don't know whether Ghazala or Juvaria are going to be speaking first or second. Just want to also just remind everybody that for questions and answers, there's a little button towards the right of the band at the bottom of your screen for questions and answers that you can pose as the speakers are speaking, and then we'll take them at the end when everybody is finished speaking, okay? Thank you. So Ghazala or Juvaria?
Yes, I am going to talk about what we thought that I will talk about from the perspective of the workers, how they are going through this time. And then Juvaria will give her about the clients that we serve.
Okay, thank you very much, Ghazala. Go ahead.
So I'm Ghazala. I work at South Asian Women's Community Center, and it's been 20 years that I'm working there. And this is the situation we are going through. This emergency has been the first time that we have to go through this. We were not prepared fully for this. We were hearing things here and there. But when in an emergency, we have to close down, make the decision to close the center, it was not easy for us, because this time is a time which is very crucial for us. We have to submit some applications, we have to submit some grant applications, reports, and the whole system is set up at the center with our softwares, which we cannot access from distance. So it really made our work really difficult, but we are trying our best, although we have got some leniency from the funding agencies to submit our reports, our applications, maybe a month after. But still, it's a challenge for us. And because we are not used to working at home workers, timings with family around, it seems really difficult. We can help the clients if they are simple requests, but specifically the workers are feeling that if they receive a request or call from somebody who's going through violent situation, they found that this is for confidentiality, and the family members around, they really feel uncomfortable to talk to them. And to organize everything, we have to ask all of our workers to buy a separate cell phone. Then we went to the center to leave messages for our client that please, from today onwards, you have to call us at this number to get help. And statistics, things, I usually go and bring things, but when I'm doing my work right away, I feel, oh my God, I don't have that information. It's mean I again have to go back and get it. It's quite challenging working from home when you don't have a setup at home, and you have to sacrifice many things. And when you go out to the center to get the things, it's stressful. Although I take my car, but still I feel that I am breaking the law. And when I'm in the center, I feel that, oh my God, if somebody comes and asks me, why are you here? What I am going to tell, because we try to find something on the Quebec website to register our center as essential service, in the sense that we have to provide reports on a time-sensitive manner to the government. But nobody has called me. I have filled the form, but nobody has called me. So it's difficult. We are learning new things. We are trying to adjust to this new routine of working from home, sharing, meeting on the Zoom, and feeling still uncertain what is going to happen. So it's really difficult. Thanks God we have the funding. We can pay the salaries to the workers. But I don't know in the future what is going to happen, how things going to work, how that normal that we are saying it's going to come normal, new normal will be for us to adjust. And both the government agencies from where we get the funding have sent us forms that if we are spending money to adjust to this emergency situation, they want us to tell them how much it is. I don't know if they are going to pay us or not, but this is what they are being kind enough to support us in this situation also. And that's it from my side, and I will leave it for Javeria to share you the concerns and the questions that we get from the client and how the workers are helping them. I hope it's okay. Everybody heard me?
Yeah, I think everybody heard you. I heard you very much. Thank you so much, Gazla. It's, yeah, again, it's quite an eye-opener to understand people's particular situations in the communities where you're working. Thank you very much. And now we're going to hear from your colleague, Javeria. Thank you, Javeria. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. So my name is Javeria. I work with Ghazala in the South Asian Women's Community Center. Ghazala has talked about the challenges of all the workers, including myself. I won't go there. Amy, thank you so much for talking about people's plight in this situation. You have covered many of the points that I was going to talk about also, because a lot of our service users come from Park Extension and COMMUNAUTÉS, so we are also very aware and anxious about this situation. I will try to talk about points that are not doubled. So I'll start with the financial crisis that we are seeing our people are facing. Many of our service users can't speak the language or can't read or write. So for them to apply for EI or CRB is almost impossible. We are doing a lot of virtual meetings with them in order to fill forms for them. So that's complicated because we need their documents and they are unable to give us documents. When we ask for 3 or 4 documents, people who can't read are finding it very, very difficult to send those documents to us. Usually at the center, when people come to us, they bring a big folder of all documents. We sift through them and we are able to take that out, which means the time to serve each service user has doubled or tripled. Then another problem that's happening is for CERB, applying for it, there are so many conditions that we can't, not everybody can benefit from it. For example, if anybody's has reduced income, they are not able to apply. Then there are people who have not filed their taxes or who are having other problems. They can't apply online. For them, the only option is either to call, which takes days, nobody responds. So people are really struggling with how to make ends meet. Some people have told us that the prices at the grocery stores of everyday items, they've really increased. And with the entire family sitting at home and eating, grocery budget has gone up. So it's becoming more and more difficult for people to pay for their grocery bills, for example. Ghazala has talked about women in violent situations. We are having difficulty in giving them the support that we can give them just because they're unable to talk freely and we are unable to talk freely from our homes. Our homes are not built in a way
Nos
that...
maisons sont pas faites pour avoir une discussion privée, donc je me sens pas à l'aise d'offrir de l'aide à une femme quand l'ensemble de ma famille est présente. Je veux pas que toute ma famille sache qu'est-ce qui se passe avec la personne à qui j'offre de l'aide. Donc, les gens sont vraiment préoccupés par rapport à leurs enfants aussi. Plusieurs des personnes qui fréquentent le centre n'ont pas un haut niveau de français, donc ils ne peuvent pas aider leurs enfants avec leurs devoirs. Et les parents trouvent ça difficile d'instaurer une routine de travail pour les enfants. Et beaucoup de parents aussi travaillent de la maison. Donc, tout ça rend les choses vraiment difficiles de faire les deux choses en simultané, prendre soin des enfants et travailler depuis la maison. Aussi, la difficulté d'accès à avoir un ordinateur ou ne pas savoir comment faire une épicerie en ligne ou ne pas avoir une carte de crédit, tout ça rend la situation compliquée. Donc, ils ne peuvent pas se faire livrer l'épicerie. Il y a des situations... J'ai reçu des appels au milieu de la nuit. Mon coloc est infecté. Qu'est-ce que je fais pour me protéger? Il y a peu de choses que ces gens peuvent faire. Ces personnes-là ne reçoivent pas d'aide, ne peuvent pas se faire livrer l'épicerie.
I've tried to contact some food banks, filled papers from the food banks and help some people to get food.
J'ai essayé d'aider certaines personnes de se faire livrer de la nourriture depuis les banques alimentaires, mais c'est vraiment pas facile.
We have some service users who are working in the food industry. They are still taking public transport to go because they don't have cars. They're not feeling very secured every day is stressful because they have to go for work, and then they're not protected. When they go to work, their factories have not provided them with all the safety equipment. They're asked to bring their own masks. If they don't have masks, they're given flimsy masks, and they're asked to wash their mask every day themselves, and which people don't feel comfortable that they are secure enough. Some people have told us that they were told by their bosses that if you have to stop working, you have to really quit, and then they won't be able to get the job. So because of this fear, they are continuing to work although they don't feel comfortable. I think I've covered all the points, excluding what Amy very well covered. That's it from my side. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Juvaria. Now we're going to hear from, hang on a minute. Oh, am I on? Here. Sorry. Oh, fuck, Christine, now I can't find the fucking text here. Hi, everybody. Okay, thank you very much, Juvaria. Yes, it's interesting how our stories overlap, of course, inevitably, because many of us are in communities that also overlap. Now we're going to hear from Thelma Castro, and she's an organizer and a founding member of the Association of Filipino Parents, and she's a longtime activist in the Filipino community. She was also a founder of PNI, which many of you know way back when. So we'll look forward to hearing about how the Philippine community is coping in this COVID-19 crisis. Thank you. Thelma?
Hi, good morning, everyone, or good afternoon. Yeah, I'm presently more involved now with women of diverse origin, of course, but with the Filipino Parent Support Group. Just a little about the Filipino Parent Support Group. That was founded in 1996, and it's composed mostly of migrant Filipino families, mostly women initially, but now we have members from the male sector parents. Okay, so that's the change that we have now. And our activities usually involve educational activities where we have parenting workshops and organizing, leadership, step-by-step organizing, membership development and recruitment, doing their bylaws and everything. And then we also have mobilizing, where we do a lot of advocacy work at the rights and welfare of the members, campaigns, like for the $15 wages, support and Philippine issues. We give support to issues in the Philippines and campaigns. And we also do some fundraising for things that are happening, like, in the Philippines, Sagip Migrante, giving support for all the different things. Anyway, what I wanted to concentrate now is we're asking about what are the changes in the work. Okay, and all our members, since they're migrants, are affected by it. Some of our members have stopped working because they mostly work as caregivers of elderly. Some continue to work. Some have stopped working too in warehouses, and the others have continued working in food depot and service-related work. We have some students with us, like adult students who have also been working part-time as caregivers. So what are the impact and what are the benefits that they have received? Some of our members have applied for SERVE and got the help, but some have applied for EI and have not gotten anything yet. Many have not applied for the benefits because they work under the table, and their income initially did not support them enough, so they have to work extra job. So these are like their second job too. Some continue to work, but their wages are very low and their jobs are heavier. Some of the challenges that we face, the biggest challenge that are faced by them are loss of income or low wages. To start with, the kind of job that they're doing with the caregiving of elderly or construction job or working in service-oriented, work like warehouse and all that. To start with, they get very low income already. And then with COVID-19, you can just imagine that these jobs, if they lose a second job or they lose all the jobs altogether, the more that they don't have any income to support themselves and their families way back home, because many of them still support their families back in the Philippines. So the others who are, we have some like seniors who are on pension, retirement pension, are forced to work second jobs of caregiving because the pensions that they receive since they have done caregiving work is very low and even is unable to support themselves. And now losing the second job, you can just imagine how difficult it is for them, to continue on supporting themselves and their families. We have a couple, for example, who have not been allowed to work because they're waiting on humanitarian ground for the government to approve whether they're in or not. And in the meantime, they're not allowed to work. So they were forced to work under the table, so to say, and get kind of jobs that are not listed. So now that they lost these jobs, where will they get their food? So that's the biggest problem that we have. The other problem are safety issues. For example, some of the caregivers who continue to work as caregivers now with elderly, they're only given a mask, like one mask for 8 hours, and they're not even given gowns to use if they're not taking care of sick clients. Can you imagine that? So it's a big issue, in terms of their own safety, the safety of their own families when they go back home, and their safety when they go to work. They have to take the public, transportation and all that. And faced with all these safety issues, they feel that somehow, even if they're working in institutions where clients are charged $7,000 a month, they don't get the benefit of that. Others get the benefit of that, plus the government not recognizing, their needs. So other problems that we have also faced are of course, the immigration problem, because some of them don't have status, some are temporary workers, and it's a big problem because somehow the government has this weird immigration where they only look at the processing fees as benefiting the government, and with them, when they're not allowed to work even, so where will they get their food? They have to really work illegally to be able to support themselves, So I think it's a big issue, women's issues somehow, because majority of those who are working in caregiving, food services, and all that are women. So it's a women's issue somehow, because somehow we continue to devalue the contribution of women as women and consider, caregiving as not really valued work as going to job. So these are very systemic problem that we have. Some of the recommendations that I can see here somehow are, for example, we have to do something about the systemic problem somehow. The lack of support for the health and social services in Quebec and in other countries are very visible, especially now with the COVID-19. The government always do not prioritize on this basic health and social services needs of the people, because somehow they're considered non-essential or they're not considered as money-making. And I think that's a very big problem somehow. such as the immigration. They're considered as cheap labor, and being considered as cheap labor, they're only seen as providing, you know, like the job that maybe no Canadians would like to do. And so they're pegged, and women are pegged into this kind of jobs, you know, where it is always low paying, it is devalued. The other thing that I think we could do is to continue a lot of campaign for, you know, for our frontline workers to get the protection they need, campaign for just wages for these frontline workers, and not only because for frontline workers, just wages for certain jobs that are women-oriented, such as caregiving. And I think the WDO should really focus a lot on that, because somehow nobody is kind of looking at it as a women's issue. And then we should continue to, campaign too for the government to really treat these migrant workers and temporary workers with protection. Even now, Canada has not signed the United Nations Convention on the Protections of Migrants and their Families. We're one of the countries that have not really recognized these things, you know, and this will continue to be a problem in the long run, you know, and in the future, even if COVID-19 is not there anymore, all these problems, racism and devaluing of women's work, devaluing of the contributions of migrants will continue on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Thelma. That was great. Yeah, hi. Yes, I mean, again, yeah, lots of, you know, many of our struggles overlap. Thank you very much for the people who are sending questions in, and we're making note of them, and we'll get around to them at the end. So keep doing that in the chat or in the Q&A button. And yeah, I just wanted to say that the whole thing about nursing homes, of course, now is like a big scandal in Quebec, because they're finally, people are forced to take notice of the horrible conditions in there. And as Thelma mentioned, some people, the residents are paying up to $7,000 and more a month for there. And meanwhile, one, the care that they're getting, because people are overworked and it's understaffed and it's a for-profit thing. So yeah, definitely a big struggle to be waged there. So thank you. Now we're going to hear from Mary Foster with Solidarity Cross Borders. I hope that she's on now, because she very kindly accepted to pull herself out of the annual general meeting or some big meeting that they're having at Solidarity Cross Borders. It's a migrant justice network based in Montreal. I'm sure you've heard of it. It's been active since 2003. They're comprised of migrants and allies, and they organize together to support individuals and families confronting an unjust immigration and refugee system. They do popular education, support work, as well as political mobilizations, demonstrations, pickets, and direct actions. So thank you very much, Mary, for joining us today, and we're happy to hear from you.
Hi, should I be? Yeah. Hi, Marie. Hi, everyone.
Good. Thank you.
Thanks a lot for having, for inviting Solidarity Cross Borders. I was hoping to try and get some other people on here, but everyone's so busy. I can just say with Solidarity Cross Borders, before the pandemic hit, we were focusing on kind of maybe two things. One, we had a campaign against the construction of a new prison for migrants in Laval, right beside the old one. And we were just ramping up and had an action and had called for a spring of action when all of those plans were suddenly shifted to a very different direction. What we saw was we'd been visiting to the detention center for some months, and we had some relationships with some of the detainees, and we were hearing the migrants who are detained at Laval, who have a precarious status. So either they've just newly arrived in Quebec as refugee claimants, or have been refused as refugee claimants, and are facing deportation, or have lived underground for some time, and then the police get them and put them in the detention center. with the Canadian Border Service Agency. So we were in touch with a lot of people, and we were hearing their concerns more and more about the fact that in the detention center, there was no way of protecting themselves from the virus. The guards were coming and going, new people were being brought in. They weren't being screened before they were put with everyone else. The cleaning staff, the food staff, everyone was coming and going. And so they wrote a petition, and we tried to help bring attention to that. And then when there was absolutely no response from the government at all, they started a hunger strike. And that lasted for 8 days. It brought a lot of attention from across the country, and even letters of support keep coming in, even from outside Canada, from overseas. And they kept their hunger strike going for 8 days. And what we never did see any response from the government on that, but we did see some changes in the sense that the rate of releasing detainees was accelerating. And so right now, and at the same time, the CDSA stopped detaining people. So they didn't ever put out a public statement saying, and they still haven't, the government is, refused to say we're going to stop detaining people. But in practice, the very few people are being detained. And in the last few new people to come into the Laval Migrant Detention Center came from other prisons, and were transferred into the Laval Center. So there's currently 2 women and 9 men left in the detention center. And it's, I think, a lot to do with the courage and amazing strength of those detainees who started the hunger strike and kept it going for so long, that we're seeing a lot of the people getting out, and we're hoping that more people will be released in the coming week. Actually, maybe at least half of them we're expecting will get released. At the same time, Solidarity Across Borders does a lot of, we're a network with a lot of members who have a precarious status and live and work, haven't forced to work under the table because they have no work permits, or have very precarious housing because of poverty and because of issues related to fear around their precarious status. For a long time, Solidarity Across Borders has hosted regular mutual aid nights where people come together. And before the pandemic hit, people were regularly attending these evenings and increasingly talking about collective projects. What we saw when the pandemic hit was that a lot of people, like the black market work, the under the table work, just disappeared for many people, and people were just suddenly left with no savings, no income, afraid that they're going to lose their homes. And that fear is amplified by fear that if anyone guesses their status, that and as actually we did see one person whose landlord called the police rather than having to go through the regie. He had figured out this guy's status and called the police, and instead of having to go through the regie to evict someone who was late on their rent, they simply called the police, and he ended up in the detention center. That was before the pandemic, but just to explain that the fact that people are sort of doubly afraid of losing their houses because of precarious status issues, and so suddenly there was a huge need for fundraising. We launched a fundraiser. It's doing pretty well, and we're able to distribute that money through all, obviously through, it's open to everyone with a precarious status, and we try to distribute it as best we can among all the needs. And then also what's really interesting is that what kind of opens an opportunity, the same way that sort of opportunities opened at the detention center in a strange way, is that because people are at home and with the fund redistribution of wealth that's going on, some people have now more time to focus on demanding status. And many people have been meeting regularly, obviously not in person, to discuss how to bring that demand now in this context of status for all, with the idea that it makes more sense than ever because the connections between people in society are so evident that the virus doesn't discriminate between people. So if the government's not responding to, not extending its measures to everyone, it's actually ultimately going to affect everyone in society. So they are planning some actions in the coming weeks together to bring forward the idea of status for all. We are continuing with our fundraising and redistribution during this time as well. I think those are the main things I wanted to share, and I'll, if there's questions afterwards too.
Thank you very much, Mary. That was great. Yes. Again, you know, it's been very inspiring to see all the work that Solidarity Cross Borders has been doing, and we're all part of your network. And of course, keep us posted on how we can join in on, you know, the follow-ups to these campaigns. And of course, we were all very happy when the detainees at that Laval Detention Center managed to get freed. That was a big victory for us all. So thanks very much. Now we're going to, just a little reminder that pour les personnes qui se sont joints récemment, for people who came on recently, please, if you need interpretation, there's an interpretation button at the bottom of your screen. So please choose French if you're listening into French, or if you want to listen into French. And also, choisissez le bouton pour l'interprétation en bas de la page, en bas de votre écran. Il y a de l'interprétation vers le français. Et puis aussi, continuez à faire vos commentaires et dans le chat, la boîte pour la conversation, ou bien le Q&A. Alors, just please continue to get your questions and your comments rolling in the chat box and in the Q&A, and we'll have a few minutes at the end to try to respond to them. So last but not least, we're going to hear from Leah Woolner. She works with the Movement Against Rape and Incest, and their mission is to counter any form of violence experienced by women as a result of unequal power and dominance in society, which arises from different sources of oppression. And I know they've been overwhelmed with work. Their work is not stopping because, as we know, women who are in difficult situations, well, it's just worse than ever now. So let's hear how they're coping. And Leah, please.
Sure. So first of all, I want to say thank you to all of the speakers so far. It's been really great to hear from all of you, and everything that you've shared so far has really resonated with our experiences at MCVI. And really how this pandemic is affecting the most precarious of us in our society, especially migrant women, undocumented women, and women who have faced different forms of violence, both in their countries of origin and here in Canada through both direct and indirect means. So as Marie mentioned in the outset, we're a feminist sexual assault center, and most of the women who use our services are women with precarious immigration status. This includes refugee claimants, temporary workers, trafficking victims, undocumented workers, undocumented women, among others. And since the COVID-19 pandemic, we're experiencing an increase in the level of requests for support by our members, and the requests are varied, There are many requests for emotional support or crisis intervention because of situations of violence. There's also an increase in requests for support with assistance in accessing important information or announcements about COVID, such as translation of public service announcements. Also assistance in accessing income supports and other very practical requests, such as help to buy groceries, etc. And so really, as many of the other speakers have already mentioned and discussed, what we're seeing in all of this is really an amplification of the existing systemic issues and barriers in the daily lives of immigrant women. And in thinking about talking about this problem, I kind of categorized it into ways. The first observation that we can make from our experiences on the ground is that most of the women that we work with are employed in essential services and are doing the difficult, dangerous, and dirty work of the préposés aux bénéficiaires, the PABs, or nursing aides. They're caregivers, cleaners, factory workers, call center workers, cashiers, work in food service. They're found in all of the different essential service sectors. And what we're seeing now is an amplification of problems that they have in their workplace, and a kind of magnifying glass on a number of the systemic inequality issues and problems with their living and working conditions. So one example that I can give is that of a refugee claimant that I am working with. She, obviously this is a temporary status, a person with temporary status, and she's from the Democratic Republic of Congo. So she didn't finish the third grade in her country of origin, and she can speak French and do some basic reading and writing, but she's a bit uncomfortable. It's not strong for her. She is also the sole provider for 6 children back home in the DRC. And prior to the COVID pandemic, she had enrolled in a course to become a préposé aux bénéficiaires, a PAB, and after about a month was told that she didn't have the language skill sets to be able to continue on with the course, because I believe it's about a 6-month course. However, recently she was called, as recently as about 2 weeks ago, she was called back to work in one of the private nursing homes, despite not having the training, and despite being told that she wasn't essentially good enough to finish the training, in one of the private nursing homes that has been in the media for having an outbreak, a really serious outbreak, and a huge shortage of staff. So prior to this, this person was living off of social assistance, which meant that she was getting only about $690 a month. That's, it's peanuts, it's nothing. That's an example of state violence towards poor folks, and was then offered this job to go into the private nursing home where she would be earning $24 an hour. So for me, this example really, and of course she took it. And so for me, this really illustrates how people who are already marginalized by our society and put into a corner are now all of a sudden are becoming essential workers, vital to not only our economy but all our collective well-being and the well-being of the other population, which is affected the most, which is elderly people. And so, as Thelma talked about in her presentation, we know that this is not new. Anybody who's worked with caregivers, or anybody who's worked with migrant women and racialized women, know that the conditions in the CHLDCs and in the private nursing homes were abhorrent before this crisis, and that this is related to the privatization of these centers, in part because of the fact that the CHLDCs and the private nursing homes had a very different working conditions. So, really what we're seeing now, as many of you have mentioned is kind of like a laying bare of the ways in which capitalism continues to exploit women as workers, especially women with precarious immigration status or who are undocumented, and as well as a failure of our society to take care of elderly folks and to value them as human beings and not just as people who are no longer valuable, productive members of our society. The second observation that I'll speak briefly to is that we are also seeing that the responses that the government has put into place do not correspond or consider the reality of women with precarious immigration status. So there are many migrant women who are falling through the cracks of government programs for financial assistance or who are simply ineligible. And this happens in a variety of different ways, but one of the primary ways is through their SIN, or their social insurance number. So, for example, I am working with a woman who was trafficked to Canada as a domestic worker, and her open work permit and temporary resident permit expired in early March. She had submitted a renewal of these documents prior to their expiry date. And then and she had been working in a minimum wage job at a factory. When the COVID pandemic started happening, she was laid off in about mid-March and needs now to apply for income assistance. However, because of the fact that her work permit and therefore her social insurance number has expired, she currently cannot access her EI benefits, even though she's met all of the other eligibility criteria and has been working over the last few months in a full-time capacity. So she's now put in a position where she is essentially being punished for having a temporary immigration status, and she's left to deal with two huge and slow bureaucratic systems in processing and understanding her individual situation, which we know under regular normal circumstances is already very complicated and hard. And she essentially now has to wait for the IRCC, for the immigration authorities, to be able to process her paper. And we've heard that this has could take months, and that in this context, many things have been delayed. So this in turn makes her even more vulnerable to different types of dangerous and exploitative situations, such as looking for ways to earn income now in spite of all of the public health precautions, and also possibly in turning towards informal ways of getting support, and even perhaps ending up in a situation of violence. And we know that the requirement to have a social insurance number excludes other women workers from accessing income supports, most notably undocumented workers. So I think, Mary and Carol and other speakers have done a really good job at talking about the ways in which undocumented folks have been impacted by the pandemic. So I won't go into that. So those are the two primary ways in which we are seeing that there's really been a failure of the government in responding and taking into the consideration the reality of migrant women. Another kind of last comment that I would make would be on an individual level. What we've been seeing is that a lot of women are calling in for emotional support, and that being in a situation, being in a lockdown, being in a quarantine, being confined to their homes, yes, not only is it for many women unfortunately unsafe because they're trapped and stuck in situations with abusers, but also that particularly for migrant women and particularly for refugee claimants, there's an emotional response to being in this situation because it reminds them of perhaps political violence or persecution, sexual violence, other experiences of violence that they have already experienced in their countries of origin. and that it's difficult to be able to work in such a context where now we as community workers are relying on technology to be able to work with these women to provide emotional support. Not everybody has regular access to internet, has a working phone, has the technological skills to be able to navigate technology. And we're relying really heavily on technology to be able to do outreach and to provide support to our members. So it's made things it's made things quite complicated, and there are many different layers to being able to adequately support people who are going through emotional crises. So in terms of what we've been doing, we've been mobilizing our resources and within our networks. So this has been challenging and has required a lot of work, but we've been successful in doing some basic things, such as putting together food baskets and delivering them to, I think, around 50 of our members. We've also been working on developing an emergency fund for the most vulnerable of the women that we work with, particularly undocumented women. So this emergency fund is based on the donations that we have at MCVI. We've been continuing, like I said before, to provide a lot of individual intervention by the phone, but as well as other support groups virtually through different platforms. In terms of kind of broader advocacy, we've had a number of conversations with our local MP to explain the situation facing many of our members, and we continue to participate in events such as these and others, such as through the Canadian Councils of Refugees, for advocacy purposes and to spread awareness on the reality of our members. So I guess just to conclude, I would say, as was really obvious in this meeting, in this conference, so many groups are facing the similar types of issues because of these overlapping and multiple systemic barriers that are facing, not just women as workers, but women as migrants, women as partners, women in all of these different realms that they occupy. And in terms of what actions can we take, I would say there's a really good call to action demand letter that has been written by the Migrant Rights Network. And this demand letter speaks to some of the issues that I spoke about earlier, particularly the issue of the expired SIN and expanding access to income support programs to all people, regardless of their immigration status. And this is an interesting, I can share it with the group, and this is an interesting demand letter because it lays out, in my opinion, some pretty concrete ways of how the government could actually go about doing this. And, also just to highlight that, as we've all articulated in one way or another today, that the systemic issues have always been there. And it's really important, it's more important than ever, perhaps, to support existing campaigns that improve the living and working conditions of migrants, but also, are inclusive of migrants in healthcare, social healthcare and social services, as well as their immigration status. So it makes me think of the Status for All by Solidarity Across Border, as well as the Fight for 15 campaign, which I know has the Immigrant Worker Center has been pretty active on. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Leah. That was great. Yes. So I think you summed it up, and you mentioned some of the groups that are working on these issues besides ours, or besides the ones that are represented here. And I think that maybe we can now have time for a few questions. Some people have been sending some in, and one maybe I'll mention a couple of questions from Marie Bordelot, who has two questions for Mary Foster, since Mary might have to run off and continue her meeting. So she's asking, do you know why there have been transfers to Laval from other detention centers? And what's going on with people getting in at the borders in Quebec, like Roxham Road? Are they immediately sent back now? So Mary, do you have any answers about that? Mary Foster, you still there? Mary? Okay, well, we'll come back to that then. Maybe for Amy, we also have Marie-Claude Manga, who's on the call, and she's saying that les gens en statut précaire ont très peur de revendiquer leurs droits les plus élémentaires. Que faites-vous de façon concrète pour ce qui concerne l'insalubrité des logements? So do you have some answers about what is being done concretely regarding insanitary conditions in people's homes when they have a precarious status and they're afraid to demand their rights? What is being done, or what can we do? Amy? Amy, okay. Are you there? Okay.
I'm here. Hi.
Okay, good. Yeah.
Alors, je dirais, certainement, c'est certainement un enjeu. Il y a beaucoup de locataires à Parc Extension qui craignent que si ils essaient de défendre leurs droits en tant que locataires, que leur propriétaire va leur dénoncer, et cela va déclencher un processus qui pourrait mener à leur déportation. Au niveau des moyens où nous essayons de contourner cela, premièrement, nous essayons où possible lorsqu'on entend des problèmes de salubrité, d'encourager les gens de parler à leurs voisins et voisines. Nous essayons de faire de la porte-à-porte afin de rencontrer d'autres locataires et discuter des problèmes dans l'immeuble, afin de collectiviser le processus pour que ça ne retombe pas uniquement sur un ou une locataire. Une autre façon que nous essayons de contourner ça, c'est en envoyant des plaintes à l'arrondissement. Souvent, ils réagissent plus rapidement et le processus est beaucoup moins personnalisé que d'envoyer des mises en demeure. Il faut noter par contre que tous les inspections sont suspendues pour le moment en raison, sauf ceux et celles qui traitent des questions de sécurité des locataires. C'est quelque chose sur lequel nous continuons à mettre pression sur les arrondissements afin de faire en sorte que les droits des locataires sont respectés, même en temps de pandémie.
Okay. Thanks, Amy. I just want to ask people, please, if you're on the English language, if you've chosen English, then it causes a bit of confusion if you speak in French afterwards because of the interpretation. So sorry about that, but anyway. So yeah. Okay, so stay in the language that you chose at the beginning. If you chose a language, it'll be interpreted, whatever you say. They're doing a great job, Véronique and Marie Bordelot. Thank you. Other questions are, we see that, Sadika is asking, what's the situation of elders, whether they're with seniors, whether they're living with the family or alone? Do you have any specific programs or advice or anything. And this is for everyone, not necessarily just for you, but if you have something, Amy, go ahead first. If not, maybe somebody else would like to say something. If you have something, if you're doing some work with seniors. Anyone? Thelma?
Yeah. I think let's look at the, what do you call these services available for the elderly. I think the most, while all the elderly are having a lot of problems with the services right now, the biggest are those who are like placed in homes with no supervision.
Whoops, what happened?
Of this elderly through the what you call this supervision of private homes, or even not only private homes but shelters, you know, and for them to be provided the basic services of frontline workers who are serving right now. They don't even have the gears, you know. So I think that we can do right away as a campaign, you know, for frontline workers to be given the provision of gears and all that for the protection of the elderly. Because as of now, the reason why they're not attended to, the elderly in shelters and in homes, is that because they don't have enough workers getting in there. The workers are overworked. They don't have enough workers in homes. And I think those are concrete campaigns that we can immediately do, you know, for them to really, for the government to really pay attention to this. Just wages, protective gears for frontline workers, and enough workers, you know, for homes and elderly.
Thank you, Thelma. Perhaps the panelists can open their videos so that I can see if somebody wants to intervene. You could raise your hand, because otherwise I can't see if people are ready to speak. So just if you could open up your video cameras, the panelists, yeah. So,
And Mary Foster is back on, so she can answer the questions.
Oh, good. Okay, so maybe we'll. Anybody else have something about the seniors before we move on back to Mary Foster's questions?
I can speak a little bit,
Yes,
because
go ahead.
through our telephone tree, we are keeping in touch with the senior service users. We are finding that when we were working from the center, seniors used to call us if they needed something. But we are finding that now we have to keep in touch with them even more, because we're hearing a lot of issues, primarily grocery, isolation, and anxiety about rest of the family who can't come see them and support them, especially women who are living alone. That what we are trying to do is call them more and more and just listen to them, because for now that's what we are thinking, the support that we can give them.
Okay, great. Thank you, Javaria. Maybe I will just go back to the question for. Mary Foster. Mary, do you know why there were transfers to Laval from other detention centers? 1, and 2 is what's going on with people getting in at the borders in Quebec, like Roxham Road. Are they immediately sent back? Do you know what's going on there, Mary?
People are held in. What happens if you have a criminal record and you lose your status because of a criminal record is that after you finish your sentence for whatever sentence you have, you are then, if you've lost your status because of that, you're then transferred to migrant detention center. So that could be one reason that people are transferred. I suspect other reasons are that the conditions in the big prisons are way worse than the migrant prison in terms of social distancing and so on. That's what I've been seeing in the information that I saw. So that could be another reason. People are moved from a criminal hold to a migrant hold, and so they're moved from a regular provincial prison to or federal prison to a migrant detention center. So that could be one reason why. People are being turned back at the border. The numbers of people coming across were decreasing, but people turned back at the border. If they don't have status in the States, they are arrested by American immigration, and they're being threatened with deportation. I'm not sure if that's gone ahead in any case or not. But yeah, people are being turned back, and they are being arrested by American immigration if they don't have status there.
Okay, thanks, Mary. We've got a question from Tess Augustine here, and this is a question of people needed desperately in the seniors' residences, and she's saying that some of our friends are taking the préposé aux bénéficiaires I guess, training or something. And they also got a letter from schools asking them to work in long-term health facilities. But because they know the health workers, that got sick from nursing homes, they don't want to accept because they're scared to get sick. What should they do to make sure that the government will guarantee their protection if they accept? Do you have some ideas about that, anyone? This is for all of the panelists, if you've got some ideas about that.
I can speak to that.
Sure, Leah, go ahead.
Sure. Hi, Tess. So, yeah, this is the same situation of the woman who I spoke to, who was who is a refugee claimant. And, you know, I think it's interesting. A lot of people obviously don't want to accept because they're scared of getting sick. I think, you know, it's hard to say, you know, how can they ensure to guarantee their protection. But I do know, you know, what Thelma is suggesting, you know, a campaign around making sure that all the workers have the protective gear that they need. That's really important. Also, just in general, increasing the working conditions of these centers, I think, is really important. Stuff like childcare, I don't know if that's a barrier for the person that you're talking to, but that's been a big barrier for us. Many women are single parents. So maybe, you know, one idea could be making a list of demands or assurances that could be presented in terms of for anybody, any individual that is considering accepting this proposal. And also maybe kind of a global campaign about these issues.
Okay, great. Thank you, Leah. We have a question from somebody who's joined us from Vancouver, actually. Can I? Oh, sorry. Sure, Thelma, go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. A beautiful example I think that is in the U.S., one of the cities in the U.S., one hospital where they suspended a group of nurses because they refused to work until the gears are provided. I think we have to do something more, you know, kind of strong campaigns like that, you know, because they need gears, they need protection, as well as they need just wages, and not to give 2,000 for somebody staying home, and they're receiving smaller than even what the government is giving for those staying home. It's not just with an increased load, you know, workload with the same salary is, I think, very unjust.
Thanks, Thelma. Yes, I think that's a good point. You know, people are getting paid more to stay home. They're getting paid more to stay home than the pittance that people work at, you know, because it's less than the average, right? Because that $2,000 is pegged to the average. Well, just shows that the people who are working in the nursing homes and so forth are earning way less than even the average minimum. So now I think that we're almost ready to wrap it up, but we've got one last question. I wanted to give some space for Barbara Waldron, who's one of our friends from Vancouver, and she's sharing that that it's really important to have united mass actions and mass struggles because they can influence reforms and protective measures. She gives the example that there's an eviction moratorium and a rent subsidy program in BC and deferment programs regarding property taxes, utility payments, and so forth, because people's action and solidarity were well organized. And then, so she's asking, though, how can the speakers for the different organizations here link their specific issues in the predicament of the pandemic to the larger class struggle and liberation struggles? If you have any things to say in that broader perspective, that would be great. Anybody want to jump in?
Well,
sure, Thelma, go ahead.
Well, as we said, in WDO, we've always been strong in terms of really identifying women's issues and at the same time identifying our class struggle, under the capitalist system. And I think somehow, I think we should take this opportunity to kind of continue our education and really come up together, with specific campaigns that are really related to COVID-19 and how the government has really renegated under duty, to the whole of us, we're here and suffering from kind of decisions that they have made in terms of prioritizing and privatization, prioritizing and money making, and less on the human, aspect of it. Anyway.
Anybody else would like to say something? Well, I think that women of diverse origins is an example of women from different communities coming together for mutual support. So I think it's a matter of building and strengthening these alliances and these collective forms of action to broaden the progressive movement and strengthen the our demands as a result. And I think that's that's what we're trying to do in this webinar, is one more attempt to familiarize ourselves more with each other's struggles, and so that we're ready to jump in when there are calls for action and so forth. I think that's one thing. Now I think that if anybody else has something, otherwise we're going to wrap it up. It's almost time up, and we'll ask Dolores to perhaps just summarize what we've been saying, and then we'll, our technical support man will put up a little PowerPoint at the end with some of our information that you can mark down. And if people want to get the contact of the speakers, we will send that around to the people who registered if you want. Okay, I'll get the consent of the panelists and send that around to the people who attended, okay? So Dolores, would you like to give us a little summary?
I can try, but I'm getting a message that my bandwidth is low, so I'm not quite sure if my voice is very garbled. Can you hear me properly?
Yes.
Yeah, we can hear you well.
Okay, so just again, thank you to everybody who participated. It was fantastic getting the evidence and the analysis. And, as we entitled this, definitely we are communities of struggle. And so our work over decades has really, politicized the way we are seeing the situation unfold. And it basically confirms that, the governments of the day prioritize who actually matters. And so when we live in a capitalist society with a neoliberal perspective and a patriarchal society and a colonial state, it just gets reinforced in this time of crisis. And what I'm going to do now is just quickly go through the various presentations that were made and just pick out a few points, not to diminish anything was said. It was really fantastic. And I hope Marie, you said we'll have access to a recording of this. So coming to Carol in ATAP, what their work has shown is they're always invisible as agency workers. They're always struggling to be visible. And now with COVID, there's further invisibilization and marginalization. So their realities that are always suppressed and unheard continue to be even more suppressed and unheard in the current reality. Amy's contribution on behalf of CAPE, again, exacerbations. So realities that are already about marginalization and precarious living conditions and condoization, etc., now get exacerbated. And measures that are undertaken by governments at various levels don't take into account the realities of marginalized communities who are making choices on a daily basis about food, medication, rent. And what we're seeing at various levels of government essentially is a kind of crisis management mode, but it doesn't deal with the long-term systemic marginalization. And we need to also take lessons from other groups working in these areas in places, for example, like the group that she mentioned in Los Angeles. In terms of the work of SOC and the lessons that are being learned, Ghazala and Juveria pointed out that as community workers, we are working in very uncertain conditions, but we're also working with users who are living in even more uncertain conditions. And so this layering of uncertainty and the stress that emerges from it. And they also said that the experiences of SOC are very similar to those of what was mentioned, what was spoken about by Carol and Amy before them. They also said that government relief measures and resources, again, as previous speakers said, don't take into account the realities of people's lives. And as marginalized groups, we only get attention with regard to the spread of infection. That's when people get very concerned about who we are and what we're doing, but our actual living conditions and the realities of our lives are not taken into consideration. And then details that, you know, a lot of the work has to be confidential, but it's impossible to do this. So the conditions of work also jeopardize the ethics with which we try to work. Thelma, on behalf of the Filipino Parents Association, pointed out again the whole gendered aspect of caregiving work and how we are seeing this very, very clearly, that now there's very little care actually given to the caregivers, and issues of financial precarity, safety, and health. It's all made very bare. And historically, workers in these sectors have been deemed non-essential because it's not money making, and suddenly they are becoming very important, but still the way in which their working conditions and their identities are framed as cheap labor, expendable, work that Canadians don't want to do, again, very, very heightened. And the irony that the compensation payments are often greater than what many of these workers in health and caregiving are currently getting, things that we have been drawing attention to for a long time. Mary, on behalf of Solidarity Across Borders, talked about this historic hunger strike that went on for 8 days. And what was very, very clear is the importance of solidarity, and that comes out from all the presentations, and how, again, in this current context, the marginalized are further marginalized. But if I can use the word positives, one of the things that's happening in our current context is that we might all be working very, very hard with a lot of connectivity, etc., but we do have perhaps much more opportunity because we're being forced to sit down, off connecting and sitting at home. And just like we're doing, this is the first time at FDO and WDO we've done something like this. So it's amazing. It's creating this opportunity of helping us to perhaps network in more connected ways. And that being said, again, the privilege of connectivity, which various speakers have talked about. So when people are marginalized, don't have access to the internet, and you're told to go online to do this, that, and the other, it becomes impossible to do that. And with Leah and MCVI, again, a lot of great qualitative information and great analysis, pointing out that government resources are inadequate. But again, as we know historically, when we challenge capitalism or patriarchy, these are systems that morph. So a woman who was considered not good enough to work as a healthcare assistant is suddenly being called a woman who was forced to live on welfare assistance of $690 a month, which is just a gross, horrendous obscenity, is now working, getting $24 an hour. And this is something we've been talking about ourselves, that whenever we challenge governments, we're told, you know, there's a debt and deficit, but now billions are being rolled out to save a capitalist system, to save a system that is already flawed. And so these are some of the messages. With regard to seniors, again, the realities of isolation and anxiety heightened very, very much more. So that's my summing up. And I think there's a lot that we have to process. I think questions have been coming about how to take this further, how to take action. No easy answers, but we need to work collectively on all this, and definitely future sessions would be very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dolores. That was a very wonderful, complete sum up. I realized that we didn't give a chance for Carol to, she's with us on the phone, and she's stayed on the phone all this time, and she's had trouble accessing the interpretation. So if you'll bear with us, and she has a few parting words, it would be great to hear from her. Alors, Carole, merci beaucoup d'être restée pour tout ce temps-là. J'espère que tu as réussi à comprendre le déroulement, là, mais si tu as quelques mots de clôture, ce serait très apprécié. Vas-y.
D'accord, merci à vous aussi. Comme mot de clôture, je vais prendre l'exemple, c'est celle d'entre nous, une de nos sœurs qui est malade en ce moment. Et je sais que tous ceux qui nous suivent sont des êtres humains. Nous ne sommes pas des animaux, et déjà même les animaux commencent à être solidaires. C'est une dame qui m'a beaucoup marquée de par sa force de caractère. Toutes ces années qu'elle a fait ici, à travailler durement et honnêtement pour survivre, parce que ça, c'est pas vivre. Et je ne vais pas dévoiler son identité, mais elle a eu à travailler pour $5 de l'heure. Elle payait son loyer honnêtement, elle payait de quoi manger, mais aujourd'hui, elle est malade. Abandonnée à elle-même simplement parce qu'elle n'a pas de statut, elle n'a aucun soutien du gouvernement. Est-ce que nous sommes devenus des monstres? Je me demande, est-ce que nous n'avons plus de compassion, de sensibilité? Ces personnes appelées sans statut sont des êtres humains et sont des citoyens québécois. Et ils ont participé, que ce soit physiquement, que ce soit financièrement, que ce soit moralement, pour l'évolution de ce pays qu'ils ont choisi aimer et se réfugier. Et je trouve que le gouvernement doit tenir compte de tout ça pour les traiter au même titre d'égalité que tous les citoyens québécois. C'est tout ce que je voulais dire. Merci.
Merci beaucoup, Carole. C'est très touchant. Et puis, ça nous rappelle, oui, justement, l'humanité de toutes les personnes et les droits que toutes les personnes doivent avoir. Alors, est-ce qu'il y a moyen de contribuer ou de faire quelque chose pour aider cette personne? Est-ce que vous avez une campagne de soutien ou quelque chose comme ça à la TAP ou quoi?
Bien sûr, parce que si elle a été prise en charge, c'est grâce à la CTI qui a pris des engagements et grâce à certains membres comme Viviana et le reste qui se sont battus pour qu'elle puisse être, parce que dans d'autres hôpitaux, on l'aurait même renvoyée dans sa situation. Mais beaucoup se sont battus pour qu'elle puisse être au moins prise en charge et qu'on s'occupe de sa santé, qu'elle a sûrement peut-être, qui s'est sûrement dégradée, peut-être aux conditions de travail dont elle était victime pendant des années et des années. Et c'est bien sûr que malgré tout, on ne paie pas espoir. En tout cas, moi, je ne paie pas espoir.
Oui.
Excusez-moi.
Oui. Écoute, merci beaucoup, Carole. Je pense qu'on va devoir terminer, mais si on va écrire à tout le monde avec le lien pour à la TAP et puis au CTI, Centre des travailleurs et travailleuses immigrantes, Immigrant Workers Center, et puis espérons que cela aurait allumé des flammes, là, je suis sûre que oui. Et puis, restez à l'écoute pour les prochaines conférences. We will be organizing other conferences in the future. Please stay in touch. Follow our website. Here you can see it on the screen. And also our Facebook page. And you can contact us by email. And please stay tuned for our next conference, which should be coming up in a couple of weeks. Okay, thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Merci à vous.
Merci à tout le monde.
Everyone.
Merci.